I spend most of my days in archives that smell like old glue and dust. Genealogical registries, heraldic records, documents most people assume have been studied to death. 3 years ago, I found something in a footnote, a Polish noble family tree from the 17th century. Branches splitting into branches, Latin annotations, coats of arms in faded ink. And then, in the margin, next to a single name, a phrase I didn't recognize, Nobilis Tartaricus, Tartarian Noble. I assumed it was a clerical error, something that would resolve itself with an hour of cross-referencing. It didn't. The name appeared again in a Russian registry, then in a land grant signed by a Polish king, then in a military roster from the 16th century. Every time the same quiet designation, Tartarian. I went looking for maps, old ones, the kind cartographers made before borders were decided by treaties. A map from 1633, Hondius, Library of Congress, across the center of Asia, spanning from the Caspian Sea to the edge of China. A label in careful Latin script, Tartaria, Magna, Great Tartary, not a footnote, not a marginal territory, a third of the known world. I looked at the family tree again, the name in the margin, the lands granted by the crown. I had no idea who these people were. European nobility operated on a system most of us understand, at least superficially. Bloodlines mattered. Titles were inherited. Power concentrated in families whose names we still recognize. Habsburg, Bourbon, Romanov. Marriage was diplomacy. Alliances were bloodlines. When a French princess married a Spanish king, it was a treaty written in genealogy. This was how Europe worked, or how we think it worked. But Europe was never sealed. Borders were suggestions. Empires were multi-ethnic by necessity. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities. The Ottomans ruled the Balkans. Foreign-born warriors could earn land. If you fought for the king, you could be granted an estate. If you served the empire, your children could inherit titles. Service nobility. It was not unusual for a general from one kingdom to end up a landholder in another. But the names I was finding were not French or German or even Ottoman. They were Tatar, Lipka Tatars, a term I'd seen before but never investigated. References to Kazan, Crimea, the Golden Horde. Place names that felt distant, disconnected from European aristocracy. And yet, here they were. In Polish legal statutes, in Russian heraldic records, I pulled more maps. Ortelius, 1570. Denial, 1757. Kerry, 1808. All of them labeled the same region. Tartaria. Subdivided, organized. Not vague, not mythological. Tartaria independence. But I didn't understand yet what that meant. I only knew that these names, these bloodlines, were documented, official, legal, and I had never learned about them. The map I kept coming back to was Dale I, 1757, French cartographer, meticulous. His maps were used by the Russian Academy of Sciences. On it, Great Tartaria is not a fringe territory labeled at the edge of the known world. It occupies the center. It spans from the Volga River to the Pacific Ocean, subdivided with the same administrative clarity as France or the Holy Roman Empire. Muscovite Tartary, east of Moscow toward Siberia. Chinese Tartary, Manchuria, bordering the Qing dynasty. Independent Tartary, Central Asia, between Russian and Chinese spheres. These are not poetic labels. These are political designations. Maps held by the Library of Congress. Maps commissioned by European governments. Maps used to plan trade routes and military campaigns. I cross-referenced the genealogies. A family in the Russian Empire, listed in the Velvet Book. The official registry of noble houses. Their lineage traced back to the Golden Horde, not as conquered subjects, as integrated nobility. They held estates. They served as generals. Their children married into Romanov-aligned houses. Legal statutes in Poland-Lithuania, dated 1591, written in Latin and Polish, confirming that Lipka Tatars Muslim warriors who had migrated from Crimean and Kazan territories were granted Slakta status. Slakta. Polish nobility, with land inheritance rights, civil protections, military command. This wasn't informal. This was law. Diplomatic letters, heraldic registries, military rosters. These were not fringe documents. They were state archives. I sat with that for a long time. If Tartarian nobles were legally integrated into European aristocracy, why had I never heard the term before? Why did Tartaria sound like internet mythology when it was sitting in the Library of Congress? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I couldn't dismiss it. The more I read, the clearer it became that Lipka Tatars were not refugees. They were a military class. Starting in the 14th century, Muslim Tatar warriors from the territories of the Golden Horde, the Crimean Khanate, and the Kazan Khanate migrated into the service of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They were recruited, invited, granted land in exchange for cavalry service. And they were given something almost unheard of in medieval Europe: legal equality. In 1591, the Polish crown issued a statute confirming that Lipka Tatars held the same noble rights as Polish-born Slakta. They could inherit land. They could serve as military officers. They could participate in the Psalm, the Polish parliament. They built estates. They founded villages. Some of these villages were exclusively Tatar. Muslim communities with mosques governed under Islamic law but legally recognized as Polish nobility. They retained their faith, but they adopted the Polish language. They commissioned coats of arms. They married into Polish noble families. I found records of this in multiple archives. Not just Poland, not just Russia. Diplomatic correspondence between the Crimean Khanate and the courts of Poland, Austria, Sweden, Denmark. These were not tributary letters. These were pure negotiations. Embassies were sent. Treaties were signed. Tartarian princes were received at European courts with the same protocol as French or Spanish envoys. And on the maps the label remained consistent. Ortelius, 1570. Hondius, 1633. Galil, 1757. Kari, 1808. Tartaria, not as a vague land of the Mongols, but as a recognized political geography, a network of khanates and steppe federations that Europe acknowledged as pure polities. I don't know yet if Tartaria had a unified ruling structure. I haven't found evidence of a single capital or a central emperor. But I know this: European powers treated these khanates as sovereign, and when those khanates were annexed, their nobility was absorbed, not destroyed. Absorbed, not destroyed. Their bloodlines entered the genealogies of European aristocracy. And then, sometime in the 19th century, the name disappeared. I started tracking the dates. The Tsardom of Russia conquers the Kazan Khanate. The Tatar elite are not executed. They are incorporated, given estates, granted titles in the Russian service nobility. Astrakhan Khanate falls. Same process. Tatar families absorbed into Russian aristocracy. Crimean Khanate annexed by the Russian Empire. Catherine the Great offers the Crimean nobility estates in exchange for loyalty. Many accept. This was not isolated. In Poland, Lithuania, Lipka Tatar communities persisted for centuries. Land ownership records from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, legal confirmations of noble privileges, inheritance documents passed down through Tatar families. Some of these villages remained exclusively Tatar into the 20th century. Genealogical records listing Tatar origin families who intermarried with Russian and Polish houses. Their descendants carried Polish surnames, Russian patronymics, but the archival notes confirmed their lineage. Golden Horde, Crimean Khanate, Kazan nobility. And then I looked at the maps again. I laid them out in chronological order. 16th century, Tartaria is labeled across Central Asia and Siberia, subdivided into Muscovite, Chinese, Independent. 17th century, same labels, same subdivisions, consistent across multiple cartographers. 18th century, still there. Dale Isles map from 1757 is one of the clearest. Great Tartary spans the continent. 19th century, the labels start to shift. By the 8080s, the term Tartaria is almost gone, replaced by Russian Turkestan, Siberia, Mongolia, Manchuria, new borders, new designations, new political geography. But the bloodlines didn't disappear. I cross-referenced the genealogies with the maps. The families whose ancestors were listed as Nobilis Tartaricus in the 16th century were still there in the 19th, still holding estates, still serving in the military. But the context had changed. Now, they were Russian nobles, Polish nobles. Their origin was footnoted, if it was mentioned at all. And the name Tartaria was gone. I kept asking the same question. Why? If this was all legal, if this was all documented, if these bloodlines were absorbed into European aristocracy through recognized legal processes, why does the term Tartaria sound like a fringe theory? Why don't we teach this? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the pattern was systematic. I found the directive by accident. I was searching through declassified Soviet archival records, looking for anything related to Tatar historiography, and I came across a Central Committee document from 1944. An order to revise the historical curriculum of the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. The language was bureaucratic, clinical. It referenced nationalistic shortcomings in the teaching of Tatar history. It instructed historians to reframe the narrative to emphasize integration with Russia rather than Tatar sovereignty. It didn't say our race, it said revise. But the effect was the same. After the annexations, Kazan, Astrakhan, Crimea, the Khanate territories were administratively reclassified. They became Russian provinces, Russian governorates. The legal designation Tartary was phased out. Maps were updated. The subdivisions disappeared. What had been labeled Muscovite Tartary became Siberian provinces. What had been independent Tartary became Turkestan. The families were not erased. Their genealogies were preserved, but their origin stories were downplayed. By the Soviet era, Tatar noble identity was absorbed into Russian imperial identity. Family histories emphasized service to the Tsar, not descent from Khans. The archives reclassified the steppe federations. They were no longer Khanates. They were Mongol tribes, Turkic nomads, fragmented, stateless. The maps stopped labeling them as political entities, and the name Tartaria became obsolete. I don't know if this was conspiracy or convenience. I don't know if it was intentional suppression or bureaucratic pragmatism. But I know this. Something real was forgotten, not because it was destroyed, because it was reclassified. The descendants are still here. Some of them know their lineage. Most don't. There are an estimated 4,000 to 6,000 people alive today who can trace their ancestry to Lipka nobility. Many of them live in Poland, Lithuania, Belarus. They carry Polish surnames. They speak Polish, Lithuanian, Russian. But their genealogies list ancestors from the Golden Horde, from Crimea, from Kazan. And most of them have never seen the maps that labeled their ancestors' homeland as Tartaria. Because those maps are no longer in common circulation, because the name is no longer taught, because the context was stripped away, I've spent 3 years cross-referencing these records. Maps, genealogies, legal statutes, diplomatic correspondence, and I can say this, Tartaria was not a single empire. It was a cartographic and political designation for the network of Central Asian and Siberian Khanates recognized by European powers as sovereign entities. The Golden Horde, the Crimean Khanate, the Kazan and Astrakhan Khanates. These were not marginal tribes. They were peer polities. They sent embassies. They signed treaties. Their nobility was legally integrated into Polish and Russian aristocracy. Their bloodlines remain in European royal family trees, not hidden, not suppressed, just unemphasized. The term Tartary was phased out of Western maps by the late 19th century, replaced by nation-state and colonial designations. Russian Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, Siberian provinces. The Soviet Union issued directives to revise Tatar historiography, reframing it to align with Russian imperial narratives, but the genealogies are still there, in state archives, in heraldic registries, in family records passed down through generations. You can access them. Anyone can. I still don't know why this history isn't widely taught. I don't know if the reclassification was intentional suppression or bureaucratic convenience. I don't know how many other noble families carry this lineage without knowing it. But I know this. We assume we know who the royal families are. We assume European nobility is purely European. We do not expect steppe Khans in the family tree. And yet, they are there, in legal statutes, in heraldic registries, in genealogies that are public record. The bloodlines didn't disappear. We just stopped teaching where they came from. I went back to the footnote that started this, the Polish family tree from the 17th century. The margin note, Nobilis Tartaricus. I traced the lineage forward, through the 18th century, the 19th, the 20th. The family is still there. The surname changed twice, once through marriage, once through legal adoption, but the bloodline is intact. And in the modern genealogical database, there is no mention of Tartaria. There is no mention of the Golden Horde. There is no mention of the legal statute that granted this family noble status in 1591. There is only the surname, and the estate, and the unbroken line of descent. This was not hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it became irrelevant. Empires fall, borders change, names are replaced. But the bloodlines remain. Archived, legal, and largely ignored, Tartarian nobles existed. They were absorbed. Their descendants are still here, and most of them don't know. How many other royal bloodlines carry names we no longer recognize? Not because they were suppressed, but because we stopped teaching their history. I don't know, but I know where to look.